but mostly I want to save a little bit of time to hear their voices, reading their text, and then finally if you have some questions, so we can move to that part. So from my right, Portia Subran is a writer and ink artist, and please follow her work on Instagram because it's just mesmerizing. She's from Chaguanas in Trinidad and Tobago. Her stories are inspired by her parents' tales of colonial and early post-colonial Trinidad, lived experience, and all talk gathered over the years. She's the winner of the 2019 Cecile DeLong Literary Prize for her short story, Twice the World, and the 2016 Small Axe Literary Short Story Competition for her work, Mango Feast. She has been published in Granta, Pre-Lit Magazine, and the Caribbean Writer. In 2024, Portia won the Commonwealth Short Story Prize for the Caribbean region, and for her story, The Devil's Son, which is the one that I have enjoyed very, very much reading these days. Next to her, we have Medita Wheatley, which is currently, I think, the longest serving faculty member in the Humanities Department, HLSCC. So she has really left an amazing mark on many of the students that have transited through our college. She's a longstanding collaborator for the BVI Beacon, and she's the author of the recently published book on the legacy of Principal Carlisle Scott, that goes by the title A Snapshot of the Virgin Islands Secondary Schools under Principal Carlisle Scott. She's also the author of poems, short stories, and her short story, My Grandfather William Hamilton Malone, has been awarded the Cedar Tree Press Prize earlier this year. And finally, next to her, Diane Leonard Drayton. She's a writer and information officer, I read, of the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force. Original, okay. She's known to showcase in writing, on canvas, and in other art forms, the colorful traditions of the life and people living in the Virgin Islands. And she at times combines these skills with other non-conventional modes of expression to illustrate the uniquely dynamic and ever-changing culture of her homeland. Her short story, Rhythm of the Conch Shell, has been awarded the Cedar Tree Press Prize earlier this year as well. Okay, so welcome to the three of you for joining us. And as I was mentioning, our title, the title of this panel is Complex, Crafting Truths, but also writing a prize-winning story, right? So the conversation will go into the personal journey that has brought you to become writers, and what does it mean for you to craft truths? So what is, how can life contribute to the written page? And how, what is also the responsibility of that writing, right? So I can start with a question that we have brainstormed together. How have your personal experiences influenced the themes and characters in your work? And if you can please share something specific, a moment that has directly inspired your writing.
Hi everyone. I just want to say first, thank you all for having me here at the festival today. I think it's my first festival speaking on a panel about my work. So to answer your question, I would say that our bodies carry stories because we have external and internal scars that we move around with us. And with personal experiences regarding my work, there was a sudden death in my family of a close relative, and in that situation, I felt like a flip switch inside of me, and also, there's this, in my story, The Devil's Son, there's a setting of the 1950s, and that is the time in which my dad grew up in. And he told me a lot of stories about that time. So combining the themes of grief and of shame and of secrets, I put it into this 1950s setting, and I think it helped to create a very rich story. And I also wanted to explore secrets because I'm very interested in secrets, like family secrets. And there are some things that we want to take to the grave, but there's always this pull that we have to do like some confessing, and we are seeking absolution. So I just wanted to put all those feelings inside of my story, but wrap it around that setting of the 1950s in Trinidad. Yeah.
Hello, I am Medita, and I want to introduce what I do by providing some context. I was very surprised when I was invited to speak on this panel because I don't think of myself as a writer who would be speaking on a panel like this. But when Rochelle invited me, I accepted the invitation without hesitation. I think maybe my instinct to trust Rochelle's judgment about whether I would be suitable or not kicked in, but also I think I'm in a way kind of reckless. And let me explain what I mean by that. Once I traveled to Paris without confirming a hotel reservation. It just so happened it was at a time of the year when the world was in Paris for an international conference. Fortunately, I had met a kind lady in St. Martin who was carrying a winter coat. And we struck up a conversation, and because I was with her, I didn't have to sleep under the bridge. That first day, she gave me a lodging in her hotel. When I found out what the theme of the LitFest was, I was intrigued. I was intrigued by the theme roots and roots. And when I learned about the theme for this discussion, I was even more intrigued. Truth, crafting truths about that journey that I took before I started writing and up to today. Now, it's fascinating, and for me, those themes provide themes, sub-themes for me to write about for many years to come. Now, the truth that I write about reflects my experience of life and the motivation to write it down. That motivation is grounded in my belief that shared experiences can make the world a better place for us to live in, all of us. In order to do that, I try to address my audience in as direct a way as possible because I need to speak my truth as clearly as possible. However, I have learned over the years that in a small cultural space, being direct can have disadvantages. Nevertheless, I have no motivation to write unless I am presenting truth as I perceive it. With regard to what motivated me to start writing, many years ago, a close friend died. And in memory of her, I wrote a short poem which I published in the Island Sun newspaper. Along the way, I have written a number of poems, and I have done it at different stages of my life. When I was 70, I saw my life in 3 phases. The first 20 years of exceptional promise, the last 10 years of excruciating challenge, and equally amazing grace, and the years in between. And most of my writing has been about the years in between.
I also want to share my appreciation for this opportunity, to be able to share talents with these two young ladies. I call them young, but as well to be able to encourage others to tell their stories. And it's absolutely true. If we don't share these stories, many will go on and they never be moved to do anything more. I spoke to a gentleman, I don't remember his name, last night at the opening, and he told me, I told him actually that I came up with this idea that we take the generation, those who are in their 70s and 80s, put them in a room and let them have a day where they, or even an afternoon where they are able to share their stories. And they will bounce it off of each other and probably say, that's not true, this is the truth. Choose a topic. But they are not going to get with a pen and paper and write down their information. It has to be some way of us gathering it through, taping those sessions and and putting it down in writing for them. But it is so important that it be our truth, what we've gathered. My short story, and I am sure that these two young ladies to my left are much more accomplished than I am, and I say that without hesitation because I know that I haven't done what I was supposed to do. I didn't tell as many stories, but when Ms. Penmore made the offer, I said I have to. I have to say what my father shared with me, those stories of old that he shared with me. I have to put them down on paper, and I had done this one, and I submitted it, and I appreciated the acknowledgement that this is a story that we should share with others. So that was my inspiration, the fact that we aren't telling enough about our stories. We're not sharing that with others. And if I can do it, many others can do it. It may not be that you have great writing skills. Just put the story down and let us begin to craft it around, fill in the gaps, and make it a story.
Thank you so much. So it feels like reading your stories, really the family becomes the core of the narrative, and that's a common element that I could appreciate throughout your pages. So if it's true, the family life fuels narrative, is it possible to understand fiction? And I know that some of you have not written purely fiction, and it's more difficult for me to assess how close to reality The Devil's Son is. But is it possible that fiction, in a way, reveals truths about life that we were not necessarily thinking about? Have you ever been in that position?
I think with my work in The Devil's Son, I was translating different things I was going through into a different setting, mostly so that I created a distance so the themes could be communicated, but it wouldn't be all the way here. You know, it's at a distance. I could let the story be formed, and I think it's good to create a sort of distance so that you let your characters go forward, you let them make decisions, and you let them carry the narrative into what you want to communicate without it being too on the nose, or as some, I remember a publisher was complaining, like, some book is a little too sentimental. So, but I personally, I really like communicating those sentiments, but I think putting that sort of distance, it really helped me create a story and push a narrative so that I could reveal to readers my own grief and my own thoughts, my own relationships with siblings, things I was going through at the time. And looking back at it now, it's so well disguised, I think. And the part to the end is such an overwhelming feeling that I think we don't think that family will act, like the act, we don't think that family would do that. So I wanted to give my characters that space to react in different ways. Yeah.
One of the writers I studied in college said that good literature holds up a mirror to society. And as a member of society, I try to convey the truth that I see. I write in the first person because I want a personal connection with the reader. And what I write can be changed into story by using the third person. And so you will see that the themes I choose, although I express them from a personal point of view, they are themes that reflect what is happening in the society.
In answering your question, I believe that my writing, for sure, is based on a story. Certainly, there are areas that are filled in to make it complete. But I do think that if we want to, as the author last night shared, if we want to change culture, we have to create stories around what actually happened. So we fill in the blanks, we make it whole. And I think that's effective. It can be short, brief, exciting, but based on history, fill in those blanks.
Yeah, it feels like that literature is a way to fill in the gaps and also to reimagine the world. Absolutely. It seemed to me, well, let's say that for some of you, Dita doesn't consider herself a writer, but reading her work would tell something different, right? And I have really enjoyed all the stories, really. And other people have enjoyed them too, right? Have recognized value, literary value, not only social value in them. So this prize that you have received, how is that? How have you reacted to that? What is now? Do you feel that being an award author somehow brings with it some responsibility?
I think the interesting thing about writing an award-winning story is that while you're writing it, you don't know it's an award-winning story. Um, but I would say when you win a prize, you are instantly validated. It's no secret that writing is a very solitary job. Um, we do get inspiration from the people around us, our community, but when it gets down to it, doing the work of taking these things and manipulating them into a narrative, that is our work alone. So it's a sort of solitary work there. So when you win the prize, you feel this validation, but you get this push to write even more. You realize that your stories have worth, they have substance. And I think the responsibility is creating more of these stories that people enjoy, but also remembering the themes, that are universal, that are familiar, that go beyond time, and putting them into stories. These are the things that people recognize and value in our work. So I think the responsibility is really communicating something that is authentic and something that readers can really appreciate. And also, they don't necessarily have to relate to these settings, but I think your themes, I think that is what they should be able to relate to and understand and feel a connection with.
The sense of responsibility wasn't something that I thought about prior to my response to the invitation from Cedar Press to participate. And I really applaud Teacher Verna. She's sitting here. She's amazing in the way that she motivates those of us who are able to write to do so from a position of a sense of responsibility to the generations who will come after us. I was writing for a long time before I responded to her invitation. Most of my writing has not been shared in terms of the poetry, but my writing in the newspaper, I believe, has been appreciated. A young lady spoke to me recently, and she told me that on a Friday in her office, everybody wanted to have their own, their own paper to see what Medita has written. And I found it amusing, really, because I wasn't really writing for an audience as such. I was expressing ideas that I felt needed to be expressed, that people wouldn't normally talk about. And I think that these are some of the most important themes that we should share with future generations. Those themes that people don't want to talk about. And so, as I was saying before, in a small space, this could be challenging because people may see you in a certain way. And I remember one person responded to me and said that I was crazy. And in the next edition of the Island Sun, I wrote with a smile on my face, not the Island Sun, the Beacon. I said to him, I ask myself about that sometimes, whether I'm crazy or not.
Your question is the impact that it had when I was awarded the first place, first place in the competition. I felt as well that it's nice that I was recognized, but I'll be honest, I think today is the nicest day because much of my colleagues are here to support me, and the governor is here to support me, and that's a whole lot, you know. My boss, Geraldine Ritter Freeman, she will tell you that I stay in the shadows. I don't really come forward, but I do appreciate and I acknowledge the the effort to come all the way out here and to support the work I do. The thing that encourages me always is, again, telling that story. The story that I wrote that won the award was one of that my father told me, and it was just by the way. Let me tell you what happened to me when I was a little boy. And there's so many of those stories that are told, but they're not passed on. Even my brother never heard that story. But if we're listening and we are, ready to take it, in with us and put it on paper, it's a story that somebody else can benefit from. In it has our expressions, our thinking processes, our lean towards one way of one part of our culture or another. So it's so important that we get it on paper. And by the way, those that had read it had said, I did that myself. I was part of that experience. I remember that. And it does that. It brings them closer to home. It affirms what they were feeling at the time.
I think I have one last question because I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for reading and then possible questions from the audience. It's a question that I have not sent you prior, but it's mostly about language. Because, I experience English as a foreigner, right? It's not my native language. And when I came to Tortola after many years in the US, and I had to start over kind of picking up the accents and what makes English here, right? So when I was reading your stories, you have a specific language that ties you to the stories, to the territory, to the family language that comes across as very, very powerful, even for me who, I'm always considering myself an outsider of the language. So what is the power of language?
I think this is a really great question because I wrote my story entirely in Trinidadian dialect, and we have different levels of dialect. So we have one where it's a mix of standard English and you throw in some of the colloquialisms inside. But mine was done in proper, if I am talking to a fellow Trinidadian. And I felt at first I was really worried that this would be a barrier to, with the reader and the story. But in the end, I felt like if this was coming straight out of me into the setting, into 1950s Trinidad, into this boy, Gabriel, you understand his social status, you understand his religious background, you understand his ethnicity, the relationship he has with his peers and his family. And I think that language is powerful because it's how it pulls you straight into the story and you get lost in it in a very wonderful way. And I think it probably was enjoyable for persons outside of Trinidad and Tobago to see new things, new words like sukuya and larger bless, and to Google them and find out, lagahu is our version of a werewolf, and a sukuya is like a vampire. So I think having language that just immerses you into a new place is really wonderful. It's powerful, and I just wanted persons to be lost into my setting and into my whole 1950s Trinidad.
In a sense, I am bi-dialectal because I grew up speaking the dialect and learning to speak standard English in school. And as a teacher, I try to encourage, a teacher of language, I try to encourage the reader to think in a different way so that you have two avenues. You can use your dialect and you can, in the appropriate setting, and you can use standard English in the appropriate setting. But when I write, although I may think in the dialect, I usually try to put across my ideas in standard English for the benefit of the reader. Now, the dialect for me is very powerful. I recognize the importance of it because the language that you speak when you first start to speak becomes a part of you. I remember that I spent 5 years in the United States, and I was in a setting where I used standard English all the time. And when I came back to the Virgin Islands, I tended to use the standard English, but there are certain events that take you back to your childhood. I remember that one evening I was sitting on the gallery and I saw something that used to happen in my childhood. The fowls were flying up into the trees to roost. And all of a sudden I blurted out, "Them is fowl?" And so I recognize that that first language that you learn is always there in your thinking.
I concur. It's similarly the reader, and you certainly want to appeal to your peers within your community. The reader will be taken back there. There's a smile that comes on your face. It's reminiscent of time past. You connect. They are pulled in, and you've accomplished your mission in writing.
And it was indeed very, very successful and appropriate. You're not alienating the larger audience, I think. It makes complete sense. And you can feel the emotional, visceral connection of the narrative to the story and the history behind the narrative, which was very great. Okay, so now I want to pass the microphone again. If you can please share with us a few minutes of reading from your text.
The name of this story is The Devil's Son, and it's set in 1950s Trinidad, but the beginning is where my protagonist, he's a retired oil worker, and he hears a piece of music on the radio, and it sends him right back to his childhood. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the beginning. After hearing a phrase of music, memory suddenly rises in front of you like the clearing mist of the blue northern range. The heavy smoke of pitch oil flambeau, the smell of rain on warm asphalt in the night, the wail of your father, the silence of your mother. Some nights you will not forget, even though you feel you bury it deep enough, is a brand to the back of your skull, somehow still burning, still on fire, hiding up in layers of flesh, follicles, a web of nerves. Then suddenly, It come back to malign your mind with misery and guilt. It's like that for me now. Stick up in traffic on the way to San Fernando. And the station start to play a song that feel like a knife plunge into my belly. May I know what old-time disc jockey dig up this old-time song from my youth, Gougie Grant's The Wayward Wind. The song is a pull to my navel string. The way eating the flesh of the armored Cascadura does call you to come back home to die in Trinidad. That song pull my soul back to Chaguanas, old Chaguanas from 60 years back. A flood of memories erupting and fighting for the spotlight in my mind. The burning of bagasse, the burning smell of sugarcane and rotting bagasse, that scent like festering flesh. The splash of cold water from a gleaming copper basin on the days that boiled us in sweat, roaming through the rows of Woodford Lodge Estate looking for adventure. The sizzling crack of a film projector, the unnatural firmness and coldness of the Anglican cemetery. The bellowing of a bison, his voice vibrating down the thick muscles of his neck. The Chaguanas I did only know about was the one from the early 50s when a talk did start up about electricity coming to the village. Back then it was a village, but we papa, today them just call it a borough. To help we understand what this electricity did mean, they had was to set up a Delco generator and a silver screen in the Woodford Lodge cricket field to play a film. I could remember that day good man. Me and my partner Jaikaran had gone down early in the morning to gawk at the equipment, a huge scaffold coming down where the cricket fielders would be posted. A string of bulbs wrapped around the massive apamat trees, an untethered silk screen whipping out in the breeze, and real a film, offloading from a cart.
There's a connection between my poem that won first place in the first Cedar Press competition and the story that I wrote in the second. It's about legacy, the legacy of my grandfather. So I read the poem. It's entitled A Small Place. I am so glad that I grew up in a small place, at the foot of the hill that touched the sky, in a narrow space that touched the sea. I am so glad that I grew up where palm trees danced to pleasant beats of winds and waves, and tiny fish in crowded schools swam near the shore, where green treetops courted white clouds in the blue sky. I am so glad that I grew up in Papi's yard, a place to learn, to work and play, a place secure by night and day. 60 years on, no longer young, it makes me sad. The trees compete with roofs and poles to court the clouds in the blue sky. The beach is gone. The winds are fierce. The waves complain. I am so sad, for that small place where I grew up no longer is, and my heart breaks. It hurts to say a sad goodbye to Fat Hogs Bay. Now, as the mother of 6, I wrote a poem which speaks to a journey which could be wearying. And although you take a break now and again, you don't give up. That poem is called A McDonald's Day. I think everybody knows McDonald's. They are all over the world. And I would take a break sometimes in between taking children to school and waking to pick them up, I wrote this poem. When you've given it your best, done all you could do, yet the world keeps on spinning so much faster than you. If you want to get off and just watch it go by, hang loose for a while with no wherefore nor why, a table for one and nobody to wait. Stay as long as you wish. Let the clouds dissipate. It's a McDonald's day.
Okay, my poem is called Rhythm of the Conch Shell. And before I start reading it, I think I need to clarify one thing. Most of those that live here know what a hard nose is. But for those who don't, hard nose is a fish. I don't know why they call it a hard nose, but it has a rise in its forehead, Sylvan. It's a favorite around town, so this helps with the story. Through the window of my bedroom, I could see Willie hustling out his front door over in the yard next to us with one shoe in hand. What I got? What I got? I belted out. "'Tis hard nose," he replied just before darting down the gut. I didn't hear the conch shell blow, but I knew there was few things that made Willie move that fast early in the morning. That was the first catch of the season, so neighbor or not, he wouldn't be waiting for me to take the run down to Brewers Bay. It's first come, first serve. My brother Austin was milking the cows across the ridge over at Tom Humphrey, and mother was picking peas before the sun came up. She warned me before she left, listen out for the blow. I don't know how I still missed it. I stuck my head out the window a second time and could see the village was now in motion. Bouncing bodies in the far distance dotted the hillside and valleys, all scurrying downhill toward the shoreline. As I fought to get my shirt on, I figured there was no chance of getting any fish if I left now, but hard nose was mother's favorite. I had just pulled on a cap over my head when she came through the door. "What happened? You ain't gone yet? Man, they got hard nose. Take these couple of pennies with you," she said as I rushed past her and down the gut. Obviously, my mother had heard the shell blow too. She was the expert in the family. She knew every type of blow call and did her best to teach me the art. Some calls were easier for me than others, but I always relied on her experienced ear. The footpath was well-trodden and quiet by the time I heard the second blow, so I picked up pace. Last night's heavy rains were still on the leaves that slapped against my body as I made my way deeper into the gut. I could feel the chill as my shirt, now soaked, clung to my chest, and the track was slippery and wet, but I was determined to get at least one hard nose from my mother. That was what led to my misfortune. I remember I was jumping on the second of 4 nicely spaced rocks when I slid right off the edge, hit my mouth on the third rock, and into the watery remains of the fourth. I couldn't find my one front tooth. The other one was hanging by a thread, and my lips and chin were torn to shreds. By then, I was up to my ears in mud, so there was no way of feeling the full extent of my injuries. It took me 4 or 5 attempts to get back on my feet, but the flood waters treading through the gut washed over me, helping me to regain my shattered senses. My steps were now slow and deliberate as I forced myself to continue to the shoreline, marching to the rhythm of words aimed at whoever was listening. Where is God my mother always talking about? I ain't do nothing to deserve this. bust up my mouth, knock out my teeth. I shouldn't have never gone. It was too late. They ain't got no fish now. Where is God my mother always talking about? It was a difficult walk to the shoreline. I could muster up no greeting for Miss Caroline when she passed me on her way back up the gut with her bag of fish. She never failed to tell us about our manners, so I understand when she looked at me with utter disgust. My mother might not let me live to regret that. I'll talk to Miss Caroline before she tell on me, I said to Willie, who was also on his way back up the gut. He looked me over and knew exactly what happened, but I told him my painful tale anyway and continued to the shoreline, knowing by then there wouldn't be any fish to buy. I was in a better frame of mind now, and I could take the teasing from the boys over at Diamond, even from Cecil, who lived on the road above us. Them slippery rocks almost got me too, Cecil said as he showed me his muddy pants. When I arrived, the crowd had dwindled and only a few scattered groups were left along the beach, making use of some social time. The sun was fully up and I was uncomfortable at the many stairs as the evidence of my accident was now visible. In the distance, I could see the men cleaning the boats and washing their wares. Still, I made my way slowly to the shoreline, embarrassed that I had now come so far to find no fish, when one of the fishermen spotted me. "Hey, what happened? Come." He had a vaguely familiar face, but no one I could attach a name to. I was sure he was calling me to ask me about my misfortune. However, I was wrong. With one strong tug from under the bow, the fisherman pulled out 3 large fish, biggest I had ever seen, and it was Mother's favorite, hard nose. "I wonder what happened to you. I had these set aside for your mother. Don't tell nobody. I remember she loved hard nose. Tell her Smitty send them." He lowered his voice and face so that those on the shore couldn't see him. I tell her, thank you." I replied with the parts of my face that was still functioning. The salt water burned as I washed the mud from the cuts and bruises, but I could feel the healing beginning both physically and spiritually. After passing Miss Caroline's house to make my apologies, I walked home swiftly with the prize catch of the day. I knew Mother would be happy, and that was important to me. Now I was in step to another rhythm, with the words directed to the one who deserved them. I know the God my mother talked about. I know the God my mother served.
Thank you so much. And if any of you has a question for the ladies, we can ask and close like that. Yeah. Okay.
A practical question about the process of writing and how you approach it. And you did, and thanks for sharing those wonderful readings. You really write wonderfully musically. But is it hard work? Do you set yourselves a very sort of rigid discipline every day? You will write from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, come on, mate. Or do you wait for inspiration to come? And when the muse speaks to you, then you write. How do you approach the practical process?
For me, the process begins with like a seed of a story. My dad was telling me about the bison in the Woodford Lodge estate, and how they had to sort of tame them by attaching a trunk of a tree to them with a chain, and they would have them run until they calmed down. So that was the seed that came about, and then I wanted to write about this bison, and I was like, okay, so I'm writing about this bison in the 1950s, and the practical part is I write sort of out of order. I would write my vision at first, and then going back to getting it into some sort of chronological order, a narrative that could be followed, and just characters who I really want to embody. So I base them after like little people who I've met, not little people, but like little pieces of people I've met. And through writing and rewriting and editing, the entire story comes to a form that I like. With the physical approach, it's a little cliched, but sometimes I need to get away from the house, so I do go to a cafe and I sit and I write for about 2 to 3 hours. And I think getting away from your comfort space into a workspace is what helps me. And it could be anywhere. It could be the library and things like that. But I always end up at the same cafe. So I think it's good to create a barrier between the space in which you relax and also the space in which you work. Because the times I've tried to work in a space where I'm comfortable, I barely write a good sentence. But when I'm away from that, the words sort of flow and they come to a place where I feel good about it, where I feel like the characters are embodying my vision and what I want to communicate to my readers.
I made a few notes which I believe speak to the question that you have posed. They go this way. In terms of the formats that I use, there is a background rhythm which forms a part of my combined kinesthetic and auditory memory, which developed in my childhood. From the beat of the drum and the tone of the saxophone, the recitation of poems, the singing of choruses and Methodist hymns, they influence my poems and even my prose. But I give myself license to depart from formats which may not express what I am feeling in a given moment, whether it's sadness or relief or weariness, the whole gamut of emotions that a woman may feel. Any woman, but more so a woman of color.
My response is if I dared to have given a certain amount of time to complete or to delve into the work, it will seem like work again. And I don't want any more work. I would like an opportunity for the story to refresh me as I refresh others. So I don't put myself into any time limits. This is one thing. I wouldn't want a publisher to be anywhere around saying, "Where is your book? Where is your book?" Which is what we see in a number of films. I just want to be able, like art, just to do it when I have the freedom to do it, when I'm inspired, and when I feel I want to be refreshed.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes.
I think, Portia, you mentioned it in your previous comment. So we all go to school and we have to learn to speak proper English and all of that. How much of a battle was it for you back and forth in trying to bring the dialect out, which I think brought the truth and the feelings of your writings? How much of a battle was it for you as you're writing in, you write the word them, for example, DM instead of THEM, and do you feel that need to correct it, and how much do you go back and forth with that in writing?
Thanks for that question. I'm thinking back at my school days. I went to a Catholic girls' school, And I remember it was very strict with, composition. It's written entirely in standard English. And, but they did let us write dialogue in dialect. So that was the only, I think we sucked the life out of that, where we'd have paragraphs of dialogue so that we could really feel so free to write in dialect. With this story, I think it's a balance because it's very tempting to spell everything out phonetically. But when you look at it on the page, I realized that sometimes I was stumbling, so I would do a sort of half and half. Because even though in my mind when I'm reading, I would be reading like YUH, like year, but on the page it's YOU, just to keep a sort of balance and a rhythm with it. With struggles or challenges, like a struggle with balancing it. I think when I read it out loud and it was flowing in a way that I could understand, and I like writing with a rhythm, so that's why there's a lot of line spacing. Not exactly like poetry, but I just want you to catch your breath when I'm catching my breath. I want you to emphasize in your mind the words that I want emphasized. So I think in reading it out loud and hearing my voice and those words, I think it helped balance what I wanted to communicate without overwhelming a reader, but still having that rich dialect that Trinidad is known for. That was no, I think it's all of us.
You have a response to that.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
It's a battle between standard English and dialect in your writing. How do you navigate that?
Well,
Not to message.
as I was saying before, I may think in dialect, but for the for the benefit of the reader. Okay.
I think in this writing we're given permission. I mean, it's for the first time in our lives that we're allowed. When we were children, you dare to have said something that was in dialect. Mom would turn around, what was that? You were corrected all the time. I think writing now in dialect, you're almost given freedom to do so because it's part of what you hope to achieve in your writing. Thank you.
And a comment from an instructor that teaches composition at this college. It is limiting for our students to only have to refer to standard English. And we need to create creative spaces in which the language emerges, because that's part of who they are. So it's very much.
Just to say, when I read Ms. Drayton's short story, there's no dictionary for the dialect, but whenever she broke out in the dialect, I completely understood everything. So it's just that connection that,
Yeah.
with the audience and knowing, I don't know how somebody else would read it who is not familiar, but for me who is familiar, I totally understood everything, despite how she wrote it. I may not have spelled it the same way that she spelled it, but I totally understood everything that she was trying to say. So I thought that was interesting, but it would also be interesting on the flip end to see how somebody who's not familiar, what they would do in reading that presentation.
Any other question? No? Okay, then thank you very much again. Thank you all for coming and making this session. And just a reminder, there will be more reading tonight, brandy wine. So there will be Jared, am I remember correctly, reading from his novel Hungry Ghosts, and Deneen Milner, and somebody else that now escapes my memory, Celeste Mohammed. So if you can join us, we would love you to have you there. Bye-bye. How long have you been working for?
Like since last year, probably.
Okay.